Hi, this is Gordon Hisayasu, and I'm trying to do the second part of the unnamed Ch.3 so far. And basically, I want to try to explain some of these things that really, to me, display God and the greatness of God. Uh, I talked about fine tuning a little bit, but this one here, I hope to express a little bit more about the balance and the beauty of creation. And it's kind of to display that we can see all of this stuff that really shows us who God is and what God is. You know, the Bible says that we're without excuse, and I think that's the expression of us being able to see and the display that God has. The idea of God not being a magician, you know, it's sort of like, you know, Gary Cooper was one of my favorite old time movie stars, and he had a movie once where he took this compass and the little needle pointed to the north, and he pointed it at the Indians, and they couldn't, you know, and the Indians believed that he was magic because of this compass that he had. You know, we would like to think that we're Gary Cooper, but in a way, we are more like the Indians. The scientists are like the Indians, you know, and are discovering over and over again strange phenomena that we can't explain. And, you know, it kind of makes God not necessarily a magician, but possibly an extraordinary scientist, you know. And so whenever we see life and nature flourishing, we really have to look at, you know, that scientist part of God. You know, when I think about science and God's display, you know, we're 5 days away. I mean, 5 days ago there was a solar eclipse in the United States, and it was amazing. You know, the thing that's amazing about a solar eclipse, though, is that there's a perfect match in the size of the moon and the size of the sun at that t- time that it happens, and because of that, we can see this corona that all of a suddenly appears at a total eclipse, and that really was amazing to see that. And I kind of looked around to see why that happens, and there's a lot of things about the timing and the orbit and concentric and elliptical orbits and all this stuff. But what the part of the reality is that the sun or the moon the sun is 400 times the diameter of the moon, and the distance of the moon to the earth is 400 times the distance of the earth to the sun. So this little 400 has to be just right. And you can imagine there wouldn't be no corona if the moon was a little bit bigger or the sun was a little bit smaller or the moon was a little bit further away. It has to be kind of perfect. And what I want to say is, why is that? What does it matter? You know, it's something that's going to go on and on and on. And it's just a perfect cosmic coincidence again, you know. But you kind of wonder why. You know, I know in the past that because of that phenomena, they were able to prove Einstein's theory of relativity because they were able to see a star that was behind the sun, and they were able to prove gravitational lensing, they call it, because the light from that star bent around the sun. So they were able to prove that during a total eclipse, you know. And a lot of talk on the pre-shows of this solar eclipse was how we're going to be able to see the corona much better, and we actually have the camera and technology to see it for a much longer time than we ever do. And you only see a corona if you can block out the brightness of the sun. Coronas, of course, have a lot to do with weather control and possibly big catastrophes that could happen on Earth. So maybe that's the reason that, you know, there's this perfect total eclipse that occurs. But the real reason is that in reality, we really don't know why this occurs, you know. And not knowing why is kind of telling us how God works in so many different ways, and we don't really have the answers for those ways. I think I want to turn back a little bit again to some of the history, you know, that occurs, you know, a little bit into mass extinctions in some ways. You know, they say life began 3.5 billion years ago, but we had that 700 million years ago, we had that snowball planet. And I once saw a special where the scientists were very excited because they found microbes that could live in ice. So they went to the Arctic and they saw these big glaciers, and it's really exciting, because it was part of the extreme conditions that supported life. But it also explains how 700 million years ago life was able to survive this snowball planet that we have, where the entire planet is covered by snow or ice. It kind of brought me back to something that I talked about, and I'll look at it a little bit different this time, but it's on these mass extinctions that occurred. I'm going to list them. I'm not going to say the dates or anything, but basically the mass extinctions were pretty extreme. The first one, 86% of the species on Earth died. So that means that, we were part of the 14% that survived, of course. And then the next one, 75% of them died. And then, of course, the great dying occurred when 96% of the species died, and we were still part of that surviving 4%. After that, there was an 80% extinction, and then everybody kind of knows more about the 76% extinction that occurred when the dinosaurs were gone 65 million years ago. And every time the extinction occurred, conditions got better, and they were able to see life flourish, and again, this great diversity, and that diversity of species is pretty unexplainable in many ways. But we really have to feel how lucky we were to always be on this little surviving part of it. And as I mentioned before, it's really hard to imagine a tree of life where you really take into account these extinctions that occurred. So get a little tired of saying lucky us and lucky planet and lucky circumstances, and it really becomes kind of hard to try to explain everything away and say, well, we were just lucky. The idea is that whenever the conditions were right, the climate was right, and there was abundance of food and circumstances were good, the diversity and abundance of species just flourished. Okay, today we can look at the places where there's more species and more abundance of species, and that's in the rainforest, at the Amazons, and the other places in the coral seas, the corals, around the corals, they say there's, and it's kind of a known phenomena that, that life basically flourishes whenever the conditions get right. And you kind of ask yourself, well, how does that work? How does God do that? And why does God do that? And, he's creating and recreating, and, it seems very strange, And you can look at it and we don't know why, but you also can look at it and say, well, it's really kind of surprising that, all of a sudden we get this great place where we are. It's just, ideal for us. I remember looking at these big old fossils of giant dragonflies and stuff like that. And there was a recent article about the big whales or something like that in Scientific America, how they get large. And that occurs when there's abundant food and there's a reason to get big. They have to be able to get big. Dinosaurs were gigantic, So you see this large animals when conditions are good enough so they can get enough food. They have enough food to support a live, big old dinosaur, say. And you kind of realize that this conditions and these flourishing of species is pretty special. I talked about we couldn't be alive during the days of the dinosaurs. If we were, we would not be eating dinosaur steaks. The dinosaurs would be eating us. And as far as the predatory sense, dinosaurs are so large. I think the only thing that could have beat a T-Rex possibly is King Kong, or something like that. So it's very, very interesting to see how nature and the balance of nature keeps working, and when you look at some of this beauty of creation and the luck of, how nature balances, I could talk a lot about that because I watch a lot of nature stations. I just love to watch the beauty of creation at times, and you see it in the ones about, You know, the things that live in the Arctic and the things that live in the deep sea and etc. You know, and you always forget that there's this balance that occurs. There's a balance in nature. We forget that all the time, and you know, because of that, we're kind of ruining our ecology and the, you know, survival of some species because we forget that. But that symbiosis that occurs, it's not just on viruses and humans and, you know, some of these real obvious ones. It's really a part of all of life. We have a symbiotic relationship with life. And when you look at also the survival aspects of just the beauty of what happens, the beauty of a flower and the beauty of this mating habit, feathers that birds have and things like that, that beauty also is something that's just startling. It's something that, like the Bible says, you know, we have no excuse. We see these types of things. And part of this talk is to try to understand why we can't have that type of symbiotic relationship with God and understand how God controls everything. There's going to be a third section to this part, and I still don't have a title, but I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about these questions that we have. And I'm not going to give answers, of course, they're just questions. So there will be a part B, but thank you.